Happy third week already, week three. So I really want to be gentle as much as possible this week with the birth imprints that we can explore. And what's really, really important is that we acknowledge that everybody's birthing experience is just so vastly different. And to acknowledge that if we haven't tended to our births in a way that our body deserves that tending, then there can still be, I don't really like that word residue, but I suppose like an energetic residue of that space that needs tending to. There could be some kind of emotional tending that needs to happen. There could be some kind of beautiful, tender fascia release that needs to happen within the space. So this is how this week is going to kind of play. This could be quite a challenging week when we think about our learning zone and where we're going to be, and we need to be prepared to acknowledge and honor what we feel really, truly ready for this week. And so the invitation, as there always is in this space, everything is an invitation. The invitation is that we're going to tend to the birthing imprints and we're going to tend to the fascia within our vaginas this week and close the birth field. And so we really want to just acknowledge the preparation that needs to happen for that on Saturday. And to also acknowledge that on Saturday, this will be a full 2 hour session in order to tend to the body with as much time that might be necessary for that tending. So, what is birth imprints? Well, essentially, the birthing imprints, the birthing blueprint of what we have experienced remains in the way that we interact with the world, in the way that our nervous systems need tending, in the way that we are potentially just wired in order to navigate the world that we're in. And this starts from conception. So we really need to acknowledge that it could also not just start with conception, it could also start with potentially lineage wise, um, how we were an egg in our grandmother. And so there are so many cultural discussions that can come up around this, around how we felt as how we were, the imprints that were happening as an egg in our grandmother, and how we can feel them filtering down into our remembrance, in our tissues, in our bones, in our remembrance. And so I feel that every part of this is really, really important on a really, really grander scale to acknowledge that. And a really useful way of describing this, I find, is having witnessed and experienced quite a few people who have an Irish background. And I find this a really useful point of reference because there's so much out there. But the Irish one, because the imprint is very much from a pelvic based experience, I find this a really useful narrative to share. And it gives us something to think about on a grander scale. So the Irish, very heavily Catholic, it was very much so that there were problems over the years of women who the women became a problem to society if they had a child out of wedlock, and those children were often removed from the mothers, and the mothers were removed from society and hidden, had the baby, came back to society. And I've been blessed and honored to have heard a lot of stories on a one-to-one with clients whose grandmothers or mothers were one of those mothers. And those stories are beyond comprehension as a mother for myself to hear and witness that, to hear and witness clients who have, shared that, the baby was taken away and that was never what the mother wanted. Um, and so often those women come into my space because there's some kind of pelvic based challenge that still exists. It could be anything from struggling to conceive, painful periods, um, just not feeling whole in themselves and having like a fragmented relationship with their bodies and so on and so forth. And we also have to take into consideration so much, around safety and how we feel safe. And often there are stories of war, um, and that there were grandmothers and mothers who have had to flee their home country. Um, and so these imprints can occur within how we then navigate the world and how we find safety. And the safety I see that comes um, is the safety that comes from feeling at home within the bodies, within the pelvis, within the womb. And that's because I see this as the center of our bodies and it's a space to feel held. If there was, say, a pregnancy while the mother was having to flee, um, and you were an egg in your mother, or you were that child, then that's all going to impact on how we navigate and how we are essentially wired for the world. And then taking into account the birth that actually happened as well. And the birth for each of us is going to be so wildly different. And for some of us, we won't know anything about our births. I'm certainly one of those who I didn't have contact with my mother, um, estranged from my mother, and then my mother died over the last couple of years. So I never got to really learn my birth story. And this has impacted me hugely as well, especially with the work that I do. So I really acknowledge and really, really want to hold you if you too have not much of a recollection of your birth, but also to give this as a invitation to, if you have a relationship with your mum that's enables you to have this conversation, that might be a really healing, beautiful conversation for you and your mother to have, if that is a possibility. Or if you've had that conversation, but you want to hear more, it's like, well, I heard about my birth, but do you know what? I really want to understand the nuance of this around my birth. That would really help me to understand my birth more. And I so wished I understood my birth more when I was stepping into the birth with my children, because that matters as well. Our own body's remembrance of birth and how we then enter into our own births really matter. And so I really am a massive advocate for, if I work with a client in a doula sense, and they have a relationship with their mother, to learn more about their birth with their mother, if that's a possibility. Such a gift. And so, what I would be welcoming in is an exploration of the remembrance of your birth and your children's birth, and any other narratives that are coming up as we talk about this, and how this then impacts you, and how that impacts you as a mother, a person, and how the birth might have of your children has impacted your children. And I I'm going to share in the and attach it to the email and share on the back end a really beautiful, useful PDF to explore what the birth could have been and what the imprints might be. And so your invitation this week is, of course, you've got your journaling prompts, but also to just think about or write out or have a conversation around how there could be um, some kind of implication of the birth on how your child navigates the world positively. And of course, there may be also negatives. And so, really giving us, as a result, more compassion, more mothering, more tending, more acknowledgement, and for ourselves and for our children. And I find this the most cathartic and useful tool when tending to my children and tending to one of my children in particular. Her birth always comes up for me as it makes so much sense as to why you navigate the world in this way. And I mentioned Xanthi before in her mirroring of me when she loses something in the live call. Xanthi is a fascinating child on so many levels for me. But also because she had the most challenging birth out of all three of them. So, um, the result of what was left, I mean, I shared this on socials a little bit, but Xanthi's birth, Arlo's birth, Paloma's birth, I can see the impact on the way that they navigate it directly. And I find that cathartic. I give them more compassion as a result, and I give myself more compassion. And this is not ever for me, because believe me, the choices that I made, a really, really good question was, did you, in the live a couple of weeks ago, was, did you do this work before children? No, I did not do this work before children. And there's a part of me that sits with that where I grieve that and grieve that, oh, the shoulda, woulda, couldas, I wish I knew what I knew now. And also acknowledge that I wouldn't be the practitioner, the space holder, the woman that I am today, and the mother that I am today, if I didn't have if I hadn't have had the journey that I've had with my children to this point, if they didn't have those births. And though um, those births, when I look back, there's a lot of trauma and a lot of sadness. I don't look back with regret. I look back with a deep lens of compassion for the woman that I was in that moment and the mother that I was in that moment. And that I now have the chance to tend to myself and my children on a whole new level that I probably wouldn't have acknowledged without having had those births. Especially when I stepped into birth and I was doulaing, I found that really interesting to witness as well, because I wasn't a woman who'd had a free birth or experienced this energy that I needed to perhaps have experienced, really, which was to question more. I did question, but not enough. Um, and when I had clients that were dancing with and holding everything within the system and without the system, it was a really useful place to meet for me to be in. And if one of my clients ended in a C-section or ended in the way that the birth just in a way that the birth didn't want the birth to be and go, then I was in a place to understand with the deepest reverence of what that meant for that woman, because I too had experienced a birth go to the ways that I wished my birth hadn't have gone. And so that's why I speak to this so delicately, because basically what I see is that a lot of women don't tend to this place and they don't acknowledge this place at all. And the issue with that, and it is an issue, is that women, because they're not given the time to, is that there is a way that we then navigate the world without tending to that birth story, whether it's ours, whether it's our children, and so on and so forth. So if you're like me and you don't know your birth story, there are ways and means of acknowledging this week how it feels to have not heard your story and how it may feel to never hear your story, and to sit with how you felt perhaps in utero, and if you can sit with any remembrance of your birth. And I have been able to sit with the remembrance of the birth. And we can go with, well, you probably, if it depends how open you are to the spirituality of this space. And you might sit and go, no, I'm not as open as that, Naomi. And that's totally cool, right? Where we are is where we are. And you may never be in that space, or you may eventually be in that space. For me, I am in that space, and it's taken a lot of undoing and questioning. And I feel that I can sit with the remembrance of how I felt. Um, and there is there are things that have come up that are hard and challenging, and I acknowledge them. And as a result of that, I mother myself even more and give myself even more compassion. So everything is always an invitation to give us more compassion and acknowledgement and love and reverence for the journey that we have been on. And what I see is that any woman that's in this space, every woman deserves this space, but any woman that steps into this space knows in her bones that there's a remembrance there that needs to be tended to in some way. So what we're going to do is we're going to allow for some space and time just to be in a sacred pause and tend to this remembrance and be with what's coming up and the thoughts that are coming up around birth. And there's going to be this accompanying PDF, which I mentioned, where you can go away and you can just sit with the narrative of birth. If your birth and your children's birth don't kind of slot into any of those, then allow yourself time and space just to be with what you feel comes up. I don't have all the answers in this space. I'm not here to give you answers, as you know. I always say that. I'm here to plant seeds. It's always my job is to plant seeds. And the way I see the role for this work is that I don't need to be or do anything. I just need to give you the exploration and the odd tool to allow for you to explore it. And I see myself as the connection to the feminine, the divine, the great mother, however you want to view that. I see my role as simply this kind of bridge where you can come back to the exploration and the remembrance. You don't need anyone, you don't need me really, but I just enable this remembrance because of what's being given through me. And so you can take this and take what you want. And I always like delicate with this conversation because for some people, like I've had the odd like one or two clients where they're just sitting there and like, what have I stepped into? This is so far out and removed from my comfort zone. But I do see myself as simply just that channel, that space holder, that acknowledgement of the space, that I don't need to change anything or do anything. I'm just here, and what I hear and what I feel and what I see is needed in the space because of people like you that step into the space, which are a fucking gift. And without you and without the women that's come before you and the women that will come after you, this space would be nothing because I learn so much from the women in the space. The women in this space, whether in this container, whether have sat in this cabin with me on a one-to-one for hours and hours and hours, it doesn't, that none of that is what matters. What matters is um, how the women have shown up and the information and the shares and the space and the way that their remembrance shows in this space allows me to deepen into the space even more, and I then meander with more learnings and more acknowledgement, and then bring that back into the space, and then we deepen again and we deepen again, and it's the women that have been in this space that allow us to deepen and deepen and deepen. And so your remembrance this week will be a gift to everybody in this space, the women that have come before and the women that will come. It opens that space. So be gentle with yourself if this doesn't feel like something you feel ready to explore because this is too soon. This feels like too much. You can feel yourself going into those states, then give yourself more compassion. You don't need to explore this now. That's the beauty of this. That's the beauty of this. You'll have access to this whenever you need it, whenever you want to step into it. And so you could just come back to the journaling every day. You could just be present on the call. You don't have to turn up to the call. You can miss this week and come back to it another time, but also acknowledge that this is a really deep invitation to be in that stretchy zone if it feels welcomed. And so we're going to prep for Saturday. In the session on Saturday, I'm going to hold you alongside Lubna through this closing of the birth field. Now, you could welcome in your own birth field closing. So, if you have a deep remembrance of your birth and you feel that this birth field for yourself has never been closed, and there's like this open space that feels energetically, physically, emotionally like it could be closed, and you could close that through your own portal, through your own space, and that would then tend to your mother's closure, then you will be choosing to close the birth field of your own birth. However, if that isn't the one, then coming up for you this week, reflecting on which is, then it might be that it's a particular child's birth, your first child, if you've got more than one, or a second child, or so on and so forth. Or it may be that there's just this general kind of energetic open field of space that you feel needs tending to. And so you're going to be working with that. And so to prepare for that, I'm going to leave you with a playlist to just kind of deepen into that femininity, acknowledge your space, acknowledge your body, acknowledge the words that can land through that feminine space. And we're going to explore how we work with the fascia, how that works with closing the birth field, and how that can also work with tending to the pelvic floor, and so on and so forth. And so on Saturday, your preparation is to find a quiet space, undisturbed space where possible, where you will bring in ceremonial vibes. So you will bring in a lovely, nourishing candle, maybe. You might be in your bedroom for the cool. You want to find a space to be able to lie down. You can't really do it seated as well. You can, but it's not as comfy, I would say, if we're going to be accessing that space of just gentleness. We want to be reclined. Um, some kind of natural lubrication. This could be Yes, Yes, Yes lube. This could be coconut oil. Coconut oil is not recommended for using with condoms. I always do that PSA. And the residue of the coconut oil can remain for a day or so, let's say. So we acknowledge that if there is that, but also almond oil. And so accessing some kind of lubrication that feels welcomed. I wouldn't advise doing it without, it just makes it a more comfortable experience. You'll be using your hand, your finger, but also if you would like to use a glove, then you're welcome to use a latex-free glove if you would rather not have bare finger inside. I recommend bare finger inside. When I work with a client on a one-to-one, I always wear a glove for the client. But for yourself, without a glove, um, is a really beautiful experience. And we'll talk about the nuance of how we do it when we're in that space. So, and some kind of journal, some kind of piece of paper that you could draw on. So that's where we're going to be moving into this week. Give yourself this compassion, being gentle with yourself, acknowledging what might be coming up here. And so let's just be with this really beautiful sacred pause and just really acknowledge the body and acknowledge the body in this space. So this looks like finding yourself in a really comfortable position, just really giving yourself a moment just to pause and be with the words as they land and just see what comes up around where this holding might be within the body, like where you can feel it. And so, yeah, just see if you can be with rooting on the earth, feeling your pelvis heavy on the earth. Noticing the breath in and out breath. And notice if any sighs or relief come up when you sit with your body. How could you be 1% more comfortable in this stillness? See if you can notice where any remembrance starts to come up in birth, around the birth chat, specifically yours or your children's birth. Just acknowledging the body, its needs. Yeah, I always think that a lot can come up in this space, and we need to be hard and we need to be gentle with ourselves and really acknowledge that it's often not tended to, or it has been tended to, but not in its entirety, or there's always something, the layers of the onion, so to speak. So, yeah, thinking about the births, yours, your children's, being gentle, compassionate, a playlist for the femininity, preparing for your space on Saturday, whatever that might look like, and knowing that there's the WhatsApp group. I'm an email away if anything's coming up. And yeah, really just allowing for yourself to be in that stretchy zone and not feeling in any of those reactions and just tending to those over the week. So I'm sending so much love.